kind of reaching the end, and he starts chapter 13, which we're on here, by saying that before we turn to the next chapter, to how science and Christianity should be integrated, he wants to focus on this chapter on one bad way to put the two of them together, namely the strategy of methodological naturalism. So he titles this one, Methodological Naturalism, Theistic Evolution, and Intelligent Design. So then that's where we're going to launch off from here. So this is kind of like a good intermediary chapter to kind of show us where we've been and where we're going to before we close the book on another book here.
And he's going to spend most of this chapter, at least at the end, on criticizing methodological naturalism. Although he's going to, throw some criticisms at theistic evolution as well.
Which is always helpful as well.
Yeah.
Well, he says some of the leading critics of methodological naturalism today are proponents of intelligent design. So for intelligent design, against methodological naturalism. And I had to read that sentence about 6 different times and look up to make sure I understood what proponent was in order for me to get that. So that's why I'm over-explaining it here for future me to look back on and go, oh yes, I do remember that correctly. But many of its leading defenders, that is methodological naturalism defenders, are on the other hand, are theistic evolutionists. So both theistic evolution and intelligent design are often undefined or misidentified. Sometimes they're brought into the same camp as well. So he says that we need to begin by clarifying what and whom we are talking about. And that's always a good thing to do, is define your terms.
There you go. So he's going to really briefly tell us a little bit about intelligent design. He's not really going to get into it a whole lot. And then really briefly talk about theistic evolution before he launches into his criticism of methodological naturalism. So what about intelligent design? Well, he says the intelligent design movement is an entire approach to science. And as such, it goes far beyond just the topic of, evolution. Right? He says, but when it comes to evolution, intelligent design proponents make at least 3 claims, although he's going to be focusing mainly on the third claim, which is the rejection of methodological naturalism. So the 3 claims are, and then we'll talk about each one of these in turn. Number 1, the blind watchmaker thesis is wrong. So that's the first claim that intelligent design proponents say. Secondly, intelligent design is a science. And then thirdly, methodological naturalism should be rejected. So those are the 3 claims that he wants to briefly deal with here in a way so that he can help us to understand what intelligent design is all about.
Right. So starting off with the blind watchmaker thesis is wrong. And of course, Ben Franklin being the most hurt of them all from this truth. The blind watchmaker thesis maintains there's no scientific evidence for appealing to an intelligent designer in order to explain the history of life and the existence of nature of living things and their parts. Rather, non-intelligent, purposeless, naturalistic processes are fully adequate to explain all the relevant scientific facts. So this could go from kind of that theism point of view to a non-theistic idea of life starts here.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of, I think it was Ben Stein who wrote the book, Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
he was basically making a similar point here that you have to keep intelligence out of the scientific explanation process. And of course, the question is why, right? So,
and to show you how long ago that's been, I remember renting that movie from Netflix when they still sent you discs in the mail. So we've been hashing at it for a little bit and unable to make traction, even no matter who's in any type of house of any color at the top. So while advocates of intelligent designs demur and believe that intelligent design is a scientific model superior to the blind watchmaker thesis, and so it punches a little bit more, it makes more claims, and therefore is less, I think, kind of wishy-washy, because you can have this, I was reading Ben Franklin's autobiography, which is a kind of a weird read because you think that he would get to the point of, the revolution, and he never does. But he's sure to tell you that, his idea of this general deism has come to him, and it's just because he hasn't been bothered anymore to put much more thought into it, and he doesn't really see a point to it. And so that's kind of him in a nutshell, and that's why I always think of when the blind watchmaker thesis comes about here.
All right. So that's the first one. It's a rejection of the blind watchmaker thesis. The blind watchmaker thesis is wrong. The blind watchmaker thesis says that we have to leave any talk of intelligence out of an explanation for science. And of course, intelligent design advocates say, no, that's not the case. We should use every, piece of information and explanation that we can when we come into scientific conclusions. All right, so what's the second one? The second one then is that indeed the proponents, as you would expect of intelligent design, say that intelligent design is a science, right? Proponents argue that the facts that justify an inference to an intelligent designer, and indeed the very inference itself, are properly construed as being within the domain of science. And so obviously the intelligent design folks want to suggest that intelligence design is a science. So that's the second one. And
which in the 90s, like that was the hot button issue of whether or not it was science. And it seemed like all the court cases that came about almost sidestepped it and was like, well, you're just trying to sneak religion into it. Separation of church and state, denied.
Yeah,
there. We won.
And he's going to suggest here later on in the chapter that you don't necessarily have to come from a religious perspective in order to hold an intelligent design position. So we'll see that as we go. All right, so that was the second one. Intelligent design is a science. And then thirdly, methodological naturalism should be rejected. He says proponents of intelligent design reject methodological naturalism. Roughly, it's the idea that while doing science, scientists must limit themselves to strictly naturalistic, materialistic explanations, right? So you only talk about naturalistic, materialistic explanations when doing science. And the intelligent design folks obviously reject that particular methodology, I guess.
Right. Again, you come across a log cabin in the woods. Well, there's wood here and wood in this house. To talk about anything of a person with an axe means that you're trying to sneak your log cabin maker extremism into the education of children. And therefore, you have to just assume they all fell within the structure around a stone masonry, and that's the end of it. So that's the only explanation that you get.
No intelligence.
Right, exactly.